Little did she know that hitman she hired was undercover for the cops. And Maria Sosa was being recorded, and her husband was alive watching this unfold. This is the disturbing case of a woman who tried to hire a hitman to get rid of her husband. So Maria actually moved from Mexico to the United States in search of a better life. In 2007, she met Raymond. He was age 40 at the time and a divorced dad of 2. Also owned quite a popular gym. If you fast forward 3 years on, Maria and Raymond were married and running that gym together. You know, from the outside, the couple seemed to have it all. A successful business, a beautiful family. But however, 6 years into the marriage, things turned sour. Marie started telling her friends just how lazy she thought Raymond was. Raymond does admit that the pair did have a lot of arguments, and most of those arguments centered around money. In 2014, Maria had simply had enough, and she filed for divorce. Now, even though Maria was the one that had filed for divorce, she clearly had other plans in mind. These plans included getting rid of Raymond by hiring a hitman. Now, her plan might have worked, but the person she decided to hire just so happened to be a high school friend of Raymond's. Uploading part 2 shortly. And for more 7 Sin Crimes, remember to hit the plus.
Like I said, I'm going to take this responsible office. I got a call today from that apparently Mr. Sosa hasn't been at work today.
That's what they told me. I said, well, I haven't seen him. I haven't talked to him. We're going to divorce.
When's the last time you saw Mr. Sosa?
We saw him on Wednesday 15th, the last day.
That's the last time you saw him?
That's the last time I saw him, my mom, and my daughter.
Stand up, please. You're under arrest. Okay, you're under arrest.
Why?
Okay. Ma'am, it's okay. Stay back. We have a warrant.
So Marie Sosa planned to get rid of her husband by hiring a hitman. Well, the man she hired turned out to be his high school friend. And this is part 2. So Raymond and his high school friend went to the police and they set up a sting operation. They recorded every meeting that Maria and the hitman had. The police even got Raymond to play dead in a shallow grave, you know, to make it look like the deed had been done. Even used makeup to make it look like he had been attacked. When Maria was given the photos of her deceased husband, she laughed. And that footage you saw at the beginning is Maria lying to the police, pretending she has no idea what happened to her husband. She was arrested and immediately asked for a lawyer. In the end, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 20 years. For more 7 Sin stories, remember to hit that plus button.
Marjorie McCall lived with her husband in Northern Ireland in the 1700s. She died of fever and was hastily buried to prevent the spread of it. She was buried with her wedding ring, which was known to be very valuable. Grave robbers found out about this and so dug up her coffin. They tried to remove the wedding ring from her, but they couldn't because her fingers had swollen considerably since death. They then decided to cut off her finger. As soon as blood was drawn, Marjorie came back to life. She wasn't actually dead, but was in a coma-like state. She then sat bolt upright and screamed. At home, her husband was sitting with their children and relatives. He then heard a knock at the door and said to his kids, if your mother was still alive, I would swear that was her knock. Apparently when he opened the door, he died of shock. He was then buried in the plot that Marjorie had recently vacated. She remarried and had several more kids. She eventually died for real and her gravestone reads, lived once, buried twice.
I'm sure everybody wants to believe that these are some of the most unintelligent people on our planet, but the reality is, that's not always true. Before Ted Kaczynski was known as the Unabomber and terrorized the United States for 18 years, he was an academically gifted child who actually got into Harvard at the age of 16. During his time at Harvard, he was subjected to intense psychological testing that is actually very disturbing and 100% illegal now. He later became a professor at Berkeley, which is where things started going south. He believed that humanity was becoming immoral due to the rise of technology and went completely off the grid for 18 years, living in an isolated cabin in the woods where he manufactured and mailed bombs across the United States.
Remember those TikTokers that found a body in that suitcase following using the app Randonautica? Well, there is a case update. If you aren't too familiar with the case, basically a couple of TikTokers were using the app Randonautica, which takes you to random locations. It took them to a location in which they found a suitcase. Upon opening the suitcase, they realised they'd stumbled across something much more sinister, and it was all caught in a TikTok video. So the update. Initially, it was thought to just be one body in the suitcase. However, upon further investigation, it was discovered there were actually two. These were the bodies of the two people pictured above, 27-year-old Austin Cash Wenner and 35-year-old Jessica Lewis. They had both been shot in the head and dismembered before being put in the suitcase. No suspects have been identified as of yet, so the family of the victims have put together a $10,000 cash reward for information leading to the apprehension of the murderer. Please be sure to like, comment and share, and subscribe to my YouTube.
True Crime in Each State, Part 26, Alabama. Just a little disclaimer, this one's a little rough. Today I'm going to tell you about Judith and Alvin Neely, which are these two. Judith and Alvin eloped in 1980, but since the start of their relationship, they committed a ton of crimes together. One of those crimes would include armed robbery across the country. In September of 1982, the couple kidnapped 13-year-old Lisa from a mall. They held her captive and then sexually assaulted her, and then after that, they injected her with Drano. You know, like the cleaner, Drano. When the poison attempt failed to kill her, they shot her in the back of the head. They then threw her body off of a cliff. And then in October of 1982, they abducted a couple. They shot one of them assuming he was dead and then took the other girl back to their motel. They then tortured and murdered her. However, the guy they shot actually lived and was able to identify the two. A few days later, they were arrested. Alvin was sentenced to life in prison where he died in 2005. Judith was actually sentenced to death, but then it changed to life imprisonment. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube.
Let's talk about what happened to 36-year-old Christy Chen. So Christy was a pharmacist in Memphis, Tennessee. She was described as a fun person who had a lot of friends, and she always wanted to make sure that everyone was always included. So eventually she meets 38-year-old Bradley Dawson, and he was a IT specialist. So obviously they begin to date, and then March of 2022 they decide that they want to get married. So they had a very small, intimate wedding with friends and family, and a lot of her friends didn't even know about him until prior to the wedding because she was a very private person with her relationship. In July of this year, they decided that they wanted to go to Fiji for their honeymoon. So now it is July 8th. It is the second day that they have been there at the resort, and they're going to this little party event on the beach, and it was reported that they seemed very, very drunk, and they were actually arguing because Bradley was flirting with other women on the beach. Obviously, because of this, it caused an argument between the both of them, and they were just arguing very loudly, and they ended up going back to the bungalow where they were staying. So the people that were staying next door to their bungalow said that they could hear a loud bang, a loud scream, and then it was just complete silence. And those neighbors ended up reporting it to the resort. So there was a butler that worked in the resort. He would come to the rooms to help them if they needed anything, and he noticed that Bradley and Christy had missed breakfast, and he was kind of getting a little concerned, but he just didn't worry about it because when he went to the room, it had a do not disturb sign. Then later that day, they missed lunch also, so that is when he went back to the room once again. So the butler ended up letting himself in, and that's when he noticed that Christy was in between the toilet and the wall, just kind of like hunched together. So unfortunately, she was covered in blood and she had suffered multiple traumatic injuries. On the night that she was killed, Bradley was seen walking in the early hours on the island by a night watchman. Bradley left his GPS watch and his cell phone at the bungalow, but he took his passport and his wallet before fleeing. Bradley had took a kayak and was beginning to go towards another island at the time of 2 a.m., 3 a.m. right after the killing. He was actually discovered by a local man in that area, and he was seen with bruising and bleeding from his palms and his feet. 3 policemen ended up taking him back to the island where he was staying, and they ended up charging him with murder.
This policeman and his fiancée have been found guilty of a sickening murder. In January 2020, policeman Michael Valver called 911 to report his son Thomas was injured. Now, Thomas had apparently hurt himself on the family driveway, but upsettingly, he actually passed away as soon as he got to hospital. Thomas, pictured, and his older brother Anthony were actually Michael's biological children from a previous marriage. Michael and his previous partner had split up, and he was engaged to a new woman called Angela. Now, Angela apparently did not approve of Michael's children. Now, this case is just so disgusting, but disturbingly, police discovered CCTV footage of Michael and Angela forcing Thomas to sleep in the garage overnight. Apparently would do this to Thomas and Anthony as a punishment.
Thomas was actually autistic and the family lived in New York, which is incredibly cold in January. Thomas was made to sleep without even a blanket to keep him warm. Then, sickeningly, Michael's fiancée Angela is pictured on CCTV holding Thomas's head under really freezing cold water. This then causes Thomas to become very confused and disorientated and lose his balance as he was experiencing hypothermia. He then fell face first onto the concrete outside. Police also discovered disgusting text messages between the pair talking about beating the kids up. It's believed that teachers at the boys' school actually noticed that they were being mistreated and starved and beaten, and they tried to get child protective services involved, but nothing was done. Thankfully, both Michael and Angela have been charged with murder and face life in prison.